Obawiam jednego, że ta dyskusja może być dosyć jednostronna, dlatego chciałbym sobie zabrać głos jako wielkiego adwokata diabła, od czasu do czasu wrzucić pewien kamyczek niezgody. Ja przytoczę tytuł tego panelu. Państwo, co to jest, gdzie się znajduje, co robi, co powinno robić, co będzie robić w przyszłości, czyli w jakim kierunku zmierzamy. Z tej strony ja bym chciał dodać jeszcze dwa problemy, które mnie nurtują, a wydaje mi się dosyć interesujące. Bardzo często mówi się o optymalnym rozmiarze rządu. Jak panowie rozumiecie ten termin optymalny rozmiar rządu? Co to jest w ogóle optymalny rozmiar rządu? A drugie, bardzo często mówi się w kontekście rządu, że to jest zło konieczne. Do jakiego stopnia to jest zło konieczne, a do jakiego stopnia idąc myślą foro, powinniśmy z tego rządu zrezygnować. Proponuję może w ten sposób, żeby każdy z panów po 5 minut przedstawił swoje stanowisko, potem ewentualnie pewna wymiana, polemika poglądów, potem byśmy oddali na jakieś 15-20 minut głosy z sali, a na koniec pewna runda podsumowania. Dobrze? To co? Zaczniemy może od can I ask you?
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here, and I was delighted to learn from your lecture that Basquiat was translated into Polish so early. I never would have guessed that. I think that's wonderful.
It was translated even earlier. Some pieces of his work, his sophismas, were translated in the middle of the 19th century.
Very nice. And I'm happy that this panel was included. It gave me opportunities to say a few things that wouldn't quite fit in my lecture this afternoon, and that way I don't have to destroy the suspense of what I'm going to say later by giving it away right now. So I can separate the two things. I guess we can begin a discussion of the state in the context of Basquiat with his own definition, where he says in his essay, The State, that it is that great fiction by which everyone tries to live at the expense of everyone else. I mean, this is classic Basquiat. He is able to capture in just a few words what other people would have to write 5 and 6 volumes to discuss. This was one of his great talents. Unfortunately, it led people like Schumpeter to dismiss him as being superficial, which is, of course, ridiculous. You might also want to keep in mind in judging Schumpeter's judgment that Schumpeter thought the Austrians lost the socialist calculation debate. So anybody who would think that, I wouldn't expect to have a great judgment about Basquiat, because it was a clear victory for the Austrians against Oskar Lange, if I can mention a Polish name, and other economists. I also, Proudhon's name, of course, came up in the last lecture, which is very interesting. There is quite interesting correspondence between Proudhon and Basquiat about interest. Would it exist? Should it exist? I like to remind Americans, and American conservatives especially, that Basquiat and Proudhon both sat together on the left side of the National Assembly. They were men of the left, not men of the right. And I myself have never, certainly for a very long time, I've not thought of myself as a man of the right. And when anyone asks me for authority of that, I point to Basquiat. In fact, there was an article in the Freeman many years ago, long before I was the editor, by Dean Russell, I believe, who was a translator of Basquiat, who did an article called The First Leftist, which was about Basquiat and his allies in those days in the French legislature. But the reason I mentioned Proudhon is because Proudhon is an enigma. You can find quotations in his work which seem to imply that he was a state socialist, totalitarian perhaps. I mean, there's the famous statement he made where he said property is theft. But if you delve a little deeper into Proudhon, you see that that was not quite the unambiguous statement that it sounds. He was talking about artificial property, state-created property, as opposed to natural property. But Proudhon has a classic definition of the state, which Basquiat surely would have applauded, maybe did applaud. I wish I could quote it. It's long, and it has many elements, but I'll give you a flavor of it, where he said the state is that institution which, and then he's got about 50 words, regiments, licenses, dictates, a whole bunch of synonyms basically for oppression. The state is this, 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 this. It goes on for a full, long paragraph. And if that doesn't capture the spirit of Bastiat, I can see why they would be sitting together, even if they had some disagreements over things like interest. Now, Bastiat's definition, I think, is absolutely true. It's what the state certainly evolves into, this fiction by which we all try to live at the expense of everyone else. And I think Bastiat suggests in the law, I don't give too much away from my later lecture, that is what it turns into, but that's not how it begins. It doesn't start out as everybody living at the expense of everyone else. It begins as a small group living at the expense of the larger group. In other words, a parasitic class living at the expense of what the other French economists of his day called the industrious classes. I'm thinking now here of Charles Dunoyer, Charles Comte, J.B. Say. They had the first class analysis. We think of class analysis as a Marxist thing, but even Marx had to attribute class analysis, the first class analysis, to the bourgeois liberals. In other words, Bastiat's associates. They understood that when the state comes into existence and begins to tax, immediately two classes are established, right? Those who pay the taxes and those who consume the taxes, or what's in America we sometimes call the tax eaters, the taxpayers and the tax eaters. And those are the two broad classes that exist the moment that the state begins to tax, to distribute income, or to engage in what Bastiat called legal plunder. So I think Bastiat saw this. If you look in the beginning of the law, he talks about one of the motives for legal plunder is what? Is exploitation, is greed, is some people trying to live at the expense of other people rather than by their own labor through voluntary exchange. Only later in the book does he then talk about the second motive, which is forced philanthropy, where people say, oh, I can do good works using the state. But the first in his list of motives for the state is this exploitation. And it's a shame we shouldn't let the Marxists take away important concepts which were originally liberal concepts. Because if you look at what the industrialists, the so-called philosophical industrialists of Bastiat's day, the liberals of the day, talked about, it was that the state is a machinery of exploitation, the industrious classes, by which they meant not only the workers but the owners of businesses who were also workers in this view. In other words, they had a much broader class of the broader concept of the industrial class than the Marxists did. The Marxists tossed out the entrepreneur and the businessman and only left what they call the workers. But Comte, Dunoyer, and of course Bastiat also say would put honest business people, entrepreneurs, also in the industrious class. And it's them versus the parasitic class, the ones that want to live off the effort of other people, that constitute the state. I'll say one more thing because I know time is short, but Molinari's name came up, friend of Bastiat, a very interesting economist, and credited with, at least according to Mary Rothbard, as the first liberal economist that we know of, I guess, who pushed the concepts, the principles of markets and competition all the way. In a famous, at least famous among American libertarians, essay known as The Production of Security, Molinari, and I don't know what Bastiat would have said to this, but Molinari said, why, if we don't like monopoly, if we don't like communism, socialism, why don't we push the principles of free markets and competition all the way to the production of security? In other words, all the things which liberals have traditionally thought of as the core functions and proper functions of the state, he said, I see no reason why they could not be in the competitive economy themselves. So he was we could call him being on the frontier of liberal thought. And this, of course, is a lively discussion in the United States. I don't know so much about other places, but this is quite the discussion that goes on at institutes at FEE, the Mises Institute, all over the place, in summer seminars, students coming in talking about this. There's been a huge literature teasing out the implications of Molinari's thought ever since. So